Open University.
Hey class, sakoku. Sakoku is the term for Japan's closure from the West, from the rest of the world in fact. And sakoku happened between 1633 and 1866, and it's generally seen historically as an opportunity for Japan to resist colonialization and Christianization, because they were especially concerned, the shogunates were concerned by Spanish and Portuguese missionaries who were coming in, turning Japanese people into Christians. And these Christians, then there was an uprising in particular, which concerned the authorities and made them realize just how subversive Christianity was. But there's a sort of alternative, if you read the Wikipedia page on sakoku, an alternative, slightly more political and domestic struggle that was going on between two power groups within Japan, one of whom was empowered by its control of trade, and by making this new situation where trading was done only through the Dutch and only through Nagasaki and Dejima, this island just off Nagasaki, connected by a narrow land bridge, almost a sort of quarantine place where there could be trade done with Korea and thereby with China, but also with Holland and even Britain. These countries were seen as more able to separate trade and religion, whereas the Spanish and the Portuguese really wanted not just to trade but to convert. They were going after minds as well as wallets, if you like. So my theme for today really is to what extent the sakoku is a kind of parallel to Brexit, and to the kind of inwardness and isolationism seen in many countries in the form of this authoritarian populist movement against immigration. I'm obviously a product of 2 decades in particular which were very cosmopolitan for British people, and that's the 1960s and the 1990s. The 1960s, the decade of my childhood. I was born in 1960. I lived abroad for the first time in the 60s. My father got a job with the British Council, and we were posted to Athens. And we would have been posted to Hyderabad, India after that, but my mother didn't want to go to Hyderabad. She thought it would be unhygienic and too hot. So we came back to Britain at that point before emigrating to Canada and working in the bilingual situation of Montreal. So there was that kind of cosmopolitanism going on in the 60s. And actually, when I look at my sister's children, the closest thing I have in my family to children of my own, I see that they are not as cosmopolitan, that they do not travel as much as we did in the 60s, although it was much more expensive. With budget jet travel, you can go all over the world much cheaper now, but they don't really seem to be as interested or as caught up in a kind of globalization thing. Perhaps they take it for granted, perhaps it's all brought to them. I don't know. They know Florida really well. They go to Florida, but they don't know continental Europe. My niece Ellie has been to Venice. Robbie, my nephew, I'm not sure where he's been in Europe. He's very oriented to America, to the extent that we parallel each other in some way because we're the creative oddballs in the family, but he says to me, well, I kind of thought you were going to be my champion in the family, but you reproach me with being too American influenced, which is true, I do. He was very much totally dominated in his childhood by American computer games and The Simpsons, which he could quote by memory. And I was like, well, that's all that culture is kind of toxic, and he doesn't agree. And he studied animation and drawing at art school, and his style is one I don't really understand because it's too American. Although I guess also now he's just discovered Tove Jansson and the Moomin Trolls, which for me is a great step forward. I come from a generation that was consciously rejecting, a little bit taking a cue from David Bowie, but even David Bowie was very much influenced by Americana, by the American dream, by the Beat generation, and by rock and roll, in a way that I wasn't. I was influenced by Kraftwerk and by Bowie's turn against America when he decided suddenly to go to Berlin and to be a European and to be influenced by what was happening in European music and to decide that that was where the avant-garde really was. Nothing in America was particularly interesting to him anyway at that point. And so, when I joined, my first band was Joseph K., the remnants of Joseph K., and these were people who were looking eastwards into Europe, to Prague, or to Paris, or well, it seemed anyway to me. I also hung out at Aberdeen University with overseas students. My best friend was a Greek who was pretty high up in the student political machinery of the Overseas Students Association, which dealt mostly with African students but also continental European students. I was going every summer vacation to stay with him in Rome. His mother lived in Rome. They were Greeks, but they fled Greece when the colonels took power, just actually when we left Greece as a family as well and went to live in Italy. And when I didn't pay much attention to Britain joining the common market in the 70s. I wasn't really politically aware of that even particularly. It was just a kind of almost an automatic development, a trading organization that we were joining. But when 1993 happened and the borders came down there was free movement of people within Europe for the first time. You could go and live in whichever European city you wanted for the first time. That was tremendously exciting for me. And I went pretty much immediately to live in Paris. There was no reason for me at that point to keep living in London. Paris was a city I'd dreamed about and was culturally attuned to probably much better than London. So I lived there for a couple of years, moved back to London when London got hot again in the late 90s, and then moved to New York for a while, a couple of years in New York until 9/11 happened, and then basically lived between Japan and Berlin since then. So, and Berlin is still my kind of base in Europe. It's still where I keep my boxes, my famous boxes in storage, in case I ever move back to Europe. Of course, now I'm confronted with this issue of, do I have to become a German citizen or a French citizen or something in order to keep my roots in Central Europe? So I'm one of these people that Theresa May describes as a world citizen, i.e. a citizen of nowhere. This is her anti-liberalism formula, and I think it is very much what happened in Sakoku, in this slightly more subtle explanation of Sakoku in Japan, which is that a certain group of people within Britain, and probably this replicates in other countries too, in the US also, has designated itself as the generation of globalization. That's including people like me. We're metrosexuals, cosmopolitans, all the rest of it. And that we have fallen out of favor. It's funny, I now read the Financial Times. I'm so sick of reading The Guardian, which, although considered Britain's most left-wing newspaper, is now full of right-wing bile, especially below the line. It seems it's been infiltrated by the most rabid right-wingers and by agents of states like Israel and Russia who have an interest in undermining the post-war global order established, the sort of vaguely socialistic global order that was established with organizations like the UN, even NATO, and the European Union. These organizations which were heading towards a global government. I guess this is the right-wing conspiracy fear above all, is that there's the idea of a global government which is somehow socialistic and pervades all aspects of even your private life and all the rest of it. So libertarians hate that, but right-wingers hate it as well. These people are coming to take your guns away and to police your speech and all the rest of it. So I actually would like a global government. I am one of these people, one of these dreaded liberals and cosmopolitans and metrosexuals who believes that the problems we face, including climate change and especially climate change, are so vast that there are only global solutions to them. They are global problems that require global solutions. You can't have piecemeal solutions to them. But basically the opposite tendency. If we have global government as the sort of nightmare scenario for those right-wingers, the nightmare scenario for us liberals is of global war. Basically, what we see is an order which is based on pure power, a sort of Hobbesian struggle, which is all about selling weapons and dominating by war, military power. Although the isolationist US, maybe in some ways that this dismantling of a global American empire, which Trump seems to be interested in, is a good development. If that's indeed the result, who knows? These people usually come in talking about slimming down government and then end up vastly increasing government, and especially government spending on the military. So I see it more in terms of this subtle sakoku, which is that certain groups in society are being disempowered deliberately. And these were the groups who actually benefited from world trade. I was going to say about stopping reading The Guardian. I now read the Financial Times, because the Financial Times is the most pro-European publication left in Britain, and has intelligent below-the-line comments which are not right-wingers and not rabid conspiracy theorists, but simply economic liberals. And the economic liberal perspective, which 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I would have said was neoliberal and was the enemy as a Marxist thinker, I realize I now have much more in common with. That I am with those Financial Times readers, really. When push comes to shove, I am as a kind of world citizen, I'm kind of like them. And the reason that Theresa May thinks that they're fair game, that we are fair game, it's not just the gays, the metrosexuals, the cosmopolitans, the people who think they can live anywhere and lose their roots and who are basically traitors to any idea of patriotism. It's also that because the super rich seem to be stateless, and so in a populist scenario you can attack those people. I wrote about Japan's new sakoku in early 2009 on my blog Click Opera, and I was sort of ambivalent about it because obviously I like the particularity of Japan's culture. It's funny that actually Japanese trade didn't particularly suffer. Just as so far British trade has not suffered. I think it will. I think Britain will go into a period of decline as a result of this. Its universities are already having problems, attracting foreign students, because there's the possibility that fees will go up to, £17,000 a year for foreign students. I saw adverts in Korea for Aberdeen University, my alma mater. It's sort of amazing to see them trying to attract South Korean students to Scotland. It'll be, in a sense, a windfall for them if they can charge those higher fees, but it's also going to discourage students from going to world-famous universities like Oxford and Cambridge. People will, just as companies will start to say, let's have a base in Europe, students will go to other universities. But, actually it wasn't bad for Japan's trade. It was simply an alternative form of trade which allowed Japan to have more control. So my ambivalence about sakoku is that I like Japan. Japan is an island, okay? Britain is an island as well. We both have insular mentalities, and there's good and bad which comes from that. The good thing about going to an island, as anyone who's been a tourist and gone to an island knows, is that there's a kind of particular flavour which can prevail on an island, which can't prevail when there's kind of a free-flowing continental drift of people and ideas, which is basically flavour or style, for that matter, is a matter of leaving things out. And what you leave out, basically the water around an island filters what comes into it and leaves things out, So I do appreciate Japan's difference, especially after a trip to, say, South Korea. I appreciate the fact that Japan did make that firm decision in the 17th century to keep the Christians out, so that now you have 1% of the Japanese population Christians, whereas in Korea you have 30%. And it's interesting, my friend Tug just went down to Nagasaki, where the sort of secret enclaves of Christians were. Nagasaki was the most outward-oriented city in Japan. I don't know if he was making a film. That's his wont. His way is to make films about interesting things, and he's a Christian. It's sort of weird because we're very close friends, but I am very much not a Christian, and he's a Christian. He's particularly interested in persecution of Christians, and so I suspect he was, when he was down in Kyushu, researching the history of Christianity in Japan. And I'll have to talk about that. In fact, maybe we can video a little discussion about it when I next see him. But I come from a Christian culture. I have a Calvinist Scottish background, but in my family history, not necessarily in my immediate family, but amongst my ancestors, I'm a post-Protestant. So I'm formed by the West, but I want to experience otherness. I want to experience systems which are different. And so in some ways, I could say, well, Trump is great for America because Trump is going to dismantle the American empire, the thing we've seen, really, making disastrous blunders ever since the end of the Second World War in various countries, Vietnam being the most notable. Brexit is great because, hey, Britain was only obstructive and a neoliberal influence in Europe, and actually maybe Europe is going to be even better and more foreign, if I want it to stay foreign and different as a cultural base, without Britain. Maybe that's great. I mean, why should I have any vested interest in Britain? I'm sad, though, because I as someone with a British passport with the European Union thing on it, I know that's ending now. I think we have a tendency to exaggerate how awful the times we live in are. I think when I look at the history of any, writers like Kafka and Brecht, my favorite writers from the 20th century, one of them would have been killed by the Nazis if he hadn't died of tuberculosis, in his 40s. The other one had to keep running, not just in Scandinavian countries and European countries. He had to run even from the US because McCarthyite witch hunts were happening there. He had to testify to the Un-American Activities Committee. He was constantly kind of leaping from one tumbling domino to the next, and finally cautiously set up in East Germany, and aware that it was not the most tolerant or enlightened of places, and he kept his money very cunningly in a Swiss bank account. So I don't know, maybe we all have to go and live in Switzerland, or I don't know where is safe, because obviously the kind of world I represent, this kind of cosmopolitan, gung-ho liberalism, is ending. I think we are in a new cultural era. It's funny, I was just looking on Street View at, for some reason, Leo Chadbourne, the composer, I wanted to see what street he lived on in Hackney in London. And on the corner of his street is a dumpling restaurant run by a British couple, with some people underneath saying that they couldn't stand the Orientalist atmosphere in there. I'd be interested to know if those are sort of hipsters who think that they've got Orientalism wrong, or people who object to Orientalism in the Edward Said sense, or people who simply hate hipsters and gentrification. It may well be a combination of those. Round the corner from that, there was a block with on it a halal butcher's, a Caribbean restaurant, and a Polish grocery store. And I guess that kind of cosmopolitanism, that's very typical of London, certain sections of London anyway, and Britain in general. Polish influence, Muslim influence, and black influence. And of course, each of those populations have a different time period when they were coming in, making their impacts. Some of them will be leaving, like the Poles, probably already packing up and leaving, going back to Poland because they feel they're not welcome, and they're perhaps even being attacked, post-Brexit. A lot of race hate crimes against Europeans, white Europeans. But of course, in the Poland they will return to also has an authoritarian populist government, much worse than the one in Britain. So who knows? Who knows where is safe for us now, we cosmopolitans? I exist here in Japan really on a very temporary tolerance as a tourist. I'm a perpetual tourist here. And the government at the moment, the Japanese government, has a quota They had a quota of 20 million tourists by the year 2020. They actually already achieved that in 2016, so they doubled it. They now want 40 million tourists by 2020. Britain, by comparison, has about 36 million tourists per year. Most of those Americans. The tourists coming into Japan now are mostly Chinese. I mean, my local station here, it's called Osaka-ko. There's an aquarium near it. So my local station is absolutely swarming with Chinese visitors, also with Europeans, white people, Americans, but mostly Chinese. So it's intra-Asian tourism that's really boosting the stats. And but this policy of welcoming tourists is allowing me to keep coming in, keep breezing in with my multiple tourist visas and not really be queried, luckily. So I cling on wherever I can. I don't mind a certain precarity. I am a precarian in that sense, a precarian cosmopolitan liberal. I'm living in a country with a history of sakoku, but actually, it's funny, Marxy actually contributed when I talked in 2009 about sakoku, saying that the situation which opened, the 90s in Japan was about kind of cross-fertilization between the West and the East, and there were all these magazines and even dating sites for people to cross-fertilize, sometimes literally, Americans to meet Japanese women, blah, blah, blah. But also there was this sense that the West, Japan had an inferiority complex in regard to the West, and wanted to learn from the West's soft power and its style and fashion and all the rest of it. Paris, New York, these were the places that set styles you would find in the Japanese high street. That is now much less the case. The box office in Japan now is largely Japanese films. The Disney movies are still doing quite well. The J.K. Rowling film did very well in Japan last year, but the main box office hit, outstripping everything by a factor of 2 to 1, was this film Your Name, which is an animation film about a girl and a boy who exchange identities and bodies, and a lot of the box office top hits are Toho productions. So America has mostly been vanquished from the box office. I mean, certainly in comparison to where it was in the 90s, the last sort of cosmopolitan decade, truly cosmopolitan decade. So I think we are seeing an inwardness, but Marx's comment was that it was really just Japan reverting to the norm, that this inferiority complex, this obsessive attention to the West, and he's gone on to write this book called Amitoro, which is about the influence of preppy collegiate style on Japanese fashion in the 60s. But actually it's an era which has ended, and I would say the West is not setting Japan's cultural agenda anymore. Japan has, if anything, learned soft power, cultural power from the West, but still is having trouble outside of specific areas like certain anime and computer, and the Pokemon phenomenon, having trouble really imposing its soft power. Asia, I only learned the other day that South Korea actually banned Japanese pop music and films up until the 90s. They were actually banned, or cars. You weren't allowed to drive a Japanese car in South Korea until relatively recently. So there is a cautious improvement in relations between Asian countries, but there's still a lot of bad feeling left over from the last war and Japan's imperial expansion. So I don't know, what can we learn from sakoku? It's not necessarily bad for trade, because it's just a way to control trade. Brexit, maybe there might be 300 years of Brexit now. It'd be funny. And it might be okay for Britain. Maybe there'll be some, there'll be sort of Britain in 200 years' time will be this, England anyway, probably it'll be a little country on its own. Scotland will long ago have departed, thank God. Will be full of Anne Hathaway cottages with roses round the doors, and they'll be doing fine, and they won't have any halal butchers anymore, and they won't have any Polish groceries or Caribbean restaurants, and they won't give a damn. They'll be selling roast mutton and eel soup and stuff, and it'll be a jolly good tourist destination for the rich Chinese or the rich Indians, I guess. We'll have to wait and see.
Open University.